Welcome to the second episode of the Future of Engagement podcast. In this episode, we discuss workplace happiness and toxic environments, the role leaders play in engagement. We talk about some communication strategies to help with engagement. And finally, we discuss the importance of curiosity in leadership. Hope you enjoy.
Good morning again, Dr. Brian Peters.
Morning.
As we talked about last time, we're so proud of you and I congratulate you for becoming officially now a doctor of organizational industrial psychology with a focus on engagement, which makes you quite a valuable resource and an expert to spearhead a podcast on the future of engagement. I would say that you have the qualifications now for that big time, especially if we briefly recap what your history is. You have been in the Marine Corps. I think you were a machine gunner, right?
Yep.
Okay. And you went on from that into the corporate world.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of success in that. And you've also been pursuing, you got your master's degree. And then you now have recently completed your doctorate. And your focus is on engagement. And even in the work that you've been doing in your professional jobs, you've already applied a lot of the things that you've learned about engagement, and it's been very successful in the workplace for you. And you know, you will continue to talk about that. And as you know, I am very interested in the psychology of behavior myself, having a graduate degree in psychology too, and having written a couple of books, How to Mind Read Your Customers and How to Hire a Champion, both of which have been used in the corporate workplace for helping to hire better people and to train successful behaviors. So this week, we're going to talk about the importance of communication, because we have what we like to call the three big C's when we talk about engagement and what real engagement is. And we're never going to leave those sturdy pillars. That's leadership behaviors. What are the leadership behaviors that create engagement? What are the leadership behaviors that destroy it? And what are the communication styles and communication behaviors, communication techniques that drive better engagement? And then how do you go about using A and B, leadership and communication styles, to create a culture, a great, fantastic culture of autonomy, where you have creativity and a high degree of collaboration. We're going to talk about collaboration a lot because we know that there needs to be a huge amount of collaboration in workplaces today, especially with the advent of remarkable technology. You have to know how to collaborate. Collaboration skills are not so good. We're trying to provide some tips on how to improve that. So today we're going to talk about communication. We're going to zero in on communication and what great communication is. You made a comment earlier while we were having coffee before we sat down at the table, and you said work doesn't have to be miserable. Okay, work doesn't have to be a miserable thing. And you were having a conversation with your young son discussing the fact that you had just become a doctor, and he made a comment such that he thought that most jobs were just naturally in and of themselves miserable. Being, what is he, 6 years old?
Yeah.
He thinks that if you go to work, that's just, you're gonna have to accept the fact that going to work is not a happy thing. And you said, well, son, that's not quite true. You can be happy in the workplace. And he said, oh, really, Dad? You could actually go to work and be happy, or something like that. That was pretty funny. So can you explain to us why work doesn't have to be miserable, and how work, as your 6-year-old was asking you, can actually be fun? So in order to do that, I think you will have to tell us what makes a miserable workplace and what makes a happy workplace.
Sure. I mean, the cliche simple answer is that what people will say is like a toxic culture and disengaged employees. Toxic culture creates disengaged employees, and that's a miserable workplace. And yeah, I mean, that's I think a true, bit oversimplification. And yeah, when I was telling you the story, I thought it was funny because, he says this about, it's like, oh, why would you want to do anything to do with like work, like help people at work or whatever, because it's just, I don't want to work. And it's like, well, it doesn't have to be that way. Right. But that's a lot of things I hear a lot of adults speak that way as well, because that's been their experience. And so I think the idea that you're going to want to go to work every day is just absurd. We all have times where like we don't want to be there. And I think we talked on the last episode about the want it issue, right? If you wake up most days and you don't want to be there, that's a problem. But every once in a while, you're just not going to feel it, right? And that's okay. But yeah, if you're having most days you don't want to be there, that's typically places where people don't feel challenged. They don't feel valued, right? They either feel like they're underpaid or underappreciated. They're working really hard, and it's just nobody recognizes that in any sort of way, even if it's just like, hey, thank you so much for doing that. What I find a lot of leaders do that make people not feel valued is they're very specific with criticism, right? So like, you didn't do XYZ on this project, shame on you. But when it comes to giving praise, it's just like, hey, good job today. Good job on what? What did you notice that I did, right? Why aren't we as specific with praise as we are with criticism? So those kind of things, not feeling recognized, not feeling appreciated, not feeling challenged, right? And I think there's this idea out there that people don't want to be challenged. That's just not true. Most people, it's a bell curve, right? So there's people on the other end, right? But most people want to feel challenged, and they're like interested in what they do, challenged in what they do. There's a balance there, right? Where you don't want burnout. You don't want challenge so much where people can't do it, but people want to grow. People want to do something interesting.
That's an incredibly fascinating point. I think we need to slow this down and think about this, because what you just said is profound. It ties into the heart of human motivation from a psychological standpoint, and also points out the landmines you can step on where people can become really insulted and offended, and that's giving non-authentic or inauthentic praise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would say a good example of that is, in addition to the business stuff I do, as you know, I'm a writer, author, and a musician, composer. And what I find extremely insulting is when someone comes up and says, "Hey, I really like, that new song of yours." And you ask, "Well, that's cool. So what did you like about it?" "Well, it was just something." I was like, "Well, what was your favorite line?" I can't really remember. Mm-hmm. "Did you actually listen to it?" "Well, maybe for a couple of seconds." "Okay." That hurts worse than anything.
Yeah.
Or someone to say, "Man, I really enjoyed reading your book." "Oh, that was a great book." "Well, what was your favorite chapter?" I don't know." "Well, do you remember what it was titled?" "I can't remember the title, but you liked it." That's pretty insulting.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of thing you're saying. So I think that human beings love for you to tell them specifically what they did and why you thought that it was great, or why you thought it was cool. Like, when you communicate that to a human being, what happens in their psyche when they hear something like that? And what happens in their psyche when they hear something that's completely bogus?
Well, I think it's just that, right? Like, when you are able to point out specific things, it feels authentic. Like, they really truly see me, right? They really see the thing that I did, right? The action that I took, my hard work, all of that kind of stuff, right? They start to feel appreciated, right? Because you were very specific. So they know that you saw what they did, right? Because if you just say, again, great job, it's like, okay, again, on what? Like, what do you like? The example you gave, it's like, well, what part do you like? So people internalize it when you actually give they do it both ways. They internalize either message, right? So the first message, if you go very specific, is, oh, they actually saw it and they actually truly appreciate it. Even if you don't, which hopefully you're not giving false praise, but like, even if you don't, they're going to feel like you do, right? Like, that you actually truly mean that. Whereas if you just say good job, it's just easy to let that roll off your back and not actually feel seen, feel recognized, feel appreciated. So yeah, it's really not, I don't think, terribly complicated, right? It's are you going to show somebody that you recognize them and that you appreciate them, or are you going to make them feel like they're just another number? Right? Because I hear that a lot in organizations. Oh, I'm just another number. So like when I talk to employees, a lot of times, like I remember working for a healthcare company that did like environmental dietary services for nursing homes. And when I would talk to employees, I would go out of my way to describe the ways that their job is extremely important. Right? When I'm talking to environmental services, I would say, this, when you clean a room, that might be the last clean room, like the last time that person is ever in a clean room, right? Like they may pass away, right? Like that's extremely important. You're providing them dignity, right? Your job is valuable, right? But I was giving them very specific, not just saying like, hey, I care about you guys, right? Or like, you guys matter. It's, this is why you matter. This is why your job is so important. And I think you can do that with every job, right? And you should, right? You should let people know what you value, right? And what their contributions mean to you in a very specific way.
Okay, so having done the research that you did to become a doctor in the field of engagement, you've worked with and seen and studied a lot of companies, large and small, right? You know a lot about engagement. You studied, you studied a lot. So I want to ask you something about the level of happiness and ask you how often that you see the thing that I'm about to describe. I think companies can be happy too. I think they can be really fun. And the reason that I know that is I have a lot of fun with my team. And it's a sales team. We have a riotously good time. And I think I've told you before, I literally run my entire company off of WhatsApp. I have WhatsApp channels for my channel partners, WhatsApp for the core sales team, WhatsApp for the entire sales team. I literally run the entire company off of one page. And I'm getting constant feeds in like WhatsApp all day long. And I'm replying to people going, you're great. This is fantastic. Really good job closing on that deal. Man, I don't know how you got into that, but super job. And everybody knows. And we're just pinging one another all day long. It's fun. It's like a game, and it's incredible. And in addition to that, I've like told you, I have things lined up. So when anyone gets a successful client contact, or they get off the phone with someone, and it's good news, I get pinged. So I just sit there and I listen to my phone all day going ping, 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 ping. I mean, that makes me happy. And I can ping someone back on like WhatsApp going, that's incredible. Do it again. And so all day long, there's a constant series of like, it's communication all day long, joy, vibrancy, people texting one another, keeping one another in the loop, helping one another. It's an incredible amount of fun. And it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite sayings, energy's money. Now that level of explosive energy translates itself into wealth, right? I go into a lot of companies. I think you've told me this too. You walk inside and it's like, am I in a funeral home?
Yeah.
And you're just like looking around like, so is someone having a funeral today? Why are so many companies like still like that? They're not realizing that your number one job is to create a fun environment because that's where money comes from. Can you explain that?
Well, I don't think that there's one answer necessarily. I think that there is some of it has to do with, I think, people's just perspective of work. And some of this is, older generation. You just come to work, like that's all that matters. We don't care about happiness necessarily or engagement necessarily, right? Like, I don't know that companies historically, even though engagement has been researched for decades, right? Like this isn't a new thing necessarily. I don't think companies really saw a lot of value or really thought about it deep enough to see, outside of let's throw a mandatory fun pizza party sort of thing, right? And so I just think there's this old mentality where you're here to work. That's all that matters. Like your overall well-being, like that's your well-being is your personal life, right? Like go have fun. I work to just support my fun. And I'm not saying that, you got to sit around and play video games all day at work. But you can enjoy it. So I just think it's like an institutional thing that will change at some point, especially as you have a newer generation coming to these leadership roles that do value that. And that's not to say that there aren't, older generations that also that don't value it, right? There absolutely are, but I just don't think we see it a lot. And if it doesn't start at the top, right? If your CEOs, your COOs, your senior leadership doesn't value it, it's going to be harder down the chain, right? You can have a really good leader, but they can be sometimes handcuffed by the organizational structure and what the organization values. So I don't think it's necessarily one thing, but I do think there's just not been a lot of value placed on the well-being of workers, not understanding that research shows that you have less safety incidences when people are engaged and happier at work. You have less health insurance claims, less work comp claims, right? You have higher performance, greater innovation. Like there's all of these things that end up boosting organizational outcomes that just get ignored, right? Because you're just here to work, right? That's all that matters. So, I know that might not be super definitive, but that's just, again, generally what I see.
Well, it's you've raised some good points, and I want to ask some questions that will lead to like specific tools that people can put in their toolbox about how to have better communication that actually leads to better results and a better esprit de corps, like a better environment, because you're big on culture and how you create that culture of enthusiasm and energy where people feel a part of something and they're having fun and they understand their part in it and they're contributing and they are energetic. Because again, every super wealthy person in the world knows the formula: energy is money. If there's no energy, electrical energy in the air, ain't nothing going to happen, man. You're going to stay stuck. Yeah. You're never going to go anywhere. Everyone knows that, right? It's psychology 101 or business psychology 101. You need crackling energy of creativity. But a lot of people are stupid. I mean, you've seen the movie The Office, or is it Office Space?
Office Space, yeah.
Office Space with like the famous red stapler moment, which is kind of a meme. I can't tell you how many red staplers that I've given out to friends I've had who are in corporate environments, and I've gone in to see them, and I've been in meetings, and I've actually seen that movie take place in the real world. It's not a joke. It's apropos. There are some companies that act exactly like that. And so when I see people getting downtrodden, they're like, man, that was a red stapler moment, wasn't it? I'm like, I go out to Office Max and I get them like a red stapler just to make them laugh. Okay. So there are a lot of stupid comments, like people coming in, looking at programmers who have been servicing customers for 25 years and know exactly what they're doing. And they just want to come in and write some code and give the client what they need to have fixed by the end of the day. But yet you've got someone coming in there going, well, I asked you to provide this documentation, and when I wanted the page numbering to be on the bottom with your action plan, and you didn't. I'm very disappointed in you. You didn't really, I mean, it's like, well, who can be that stupid, right? Yeah. But that goes on. And it's like, I just want to write some code by the end of the weekend so we can get the program back up and running. So why do we still see that level of what I call like stupidity in communication with people instead of helpfulness and understanding that togetherness and helpfulness and fun is the only thing that's going to actually drive success in the workplace? I mean, it seems there should come a time when we understand that red stapler environments don't work. Okay. So why are people so fearfully hanging on to red stapler environments when there's an incredible amount of evidence to show that they're horrible? Why is that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked about this the last episode, that part of the issue is just a lack of leadership training, right? So a lot of this stuff is just bad habits that are passed down from leader to leader to leader, right? Like people are like, well, this is how it was for me, so this is what I'm going to do, completely disregarding the fact that they probably hated it when it was happening to them, right? It's just, this is how leaders act. This is what I'm going to do. I think another big issue in organizations is they if everything seems to be working right, if they're making profit, if they're making the revenue numbers, they're hitting their sales targets, does any of the other stuff matter, right? Does it matter how the leaders are acting from their perspective? I would argue that it does, right? But there are, if you are hitting your numbers, you aren't necessarily thinking about how your leaders are inhibiting your employees' ability to be innovative, to perform at a higher level. You're not necessarily worried about your attrition numbers, even though that's a significant cost to organizations. It's not as tangible as, hey, we got this $1 million sales deal, or we hit our revenue targets, or we exceeded our revenue targets, or whatever, right? So I think that's a big issue, is that there's all these underlying things. That's like, if the business is going well, what does it matter, right? Like we're doing what not looking at it as the business could be better. And by the time the business starts to go poorly, you're probably so far gone from a culture perspective that you're going to be bankrupt before you're able to turn this around, right? I mean, unless you're a huge organization with lots of with cash in the bank, you're probably not going to turn around the culture before, you're just selling the business for parts. So I think it's just short-sighted. I see this a lot in leaders, that they solve short-term problems without thinking about long-term consequences, right? It's just, I got to put out the fire now, not realizing the blaze that I'm creating down the road, right? They just don't care. They're so focused on the here and now. And I even see it at good organizations. Like the organization I work for, I think is amazing. I love going to work, but I still see it where I'm having to talk leaders out of creating these, this solves this problem, but you're causing these downstream effects that you're going to have that's going to be a problem in 6 months.
Okay. So I have something else to ask you that confuses me a lot in the area that you just talked about. As you know, and some other people know, we have our own engagement software tool that will analyze what people know about the company's business model, figure out why they might not be engaged, with a lot of specific analytical detail. Primarily, do they understand the company's business model, how they make money and lose money, and do they understand how they fit in?
Yeah.
We've got our own software program to analyze this. At the high level, we know that everybody should be able to explain to you, if you walk into a room, say, so what are the top 3 areas of accountability that you have in your job, that things that you're accountable for? As you said many times, you walk in, I don't really know. I can't articulate that. Oh, okay. Well, your company's going to be in big trouble if you can't answer the next question. What are the top 3 business drivers that you are impacting or being asked to impact in your job to move the needle and become more profitable, decrease costs, increase revenue, or whatever it is? What are the 3 areas that you're impacting on your job? Dr. Peters, I don't know. Okay, well, that's not good. Well, do you have any idea of, I guess you don't have any idea then of how you would go about helping your company to make better profits or increase revenue or decrease costs? So much. And you see that a lot. How can that be? Mm-hmm. How can that be? I mean, it's all over the place. How can it be that so many people are at work today and can't tell you what it is that they're doing in their job, why it matters, what business drivers they're hitting, and what their KPIs are? Mm-hmm. I mean, if leaders are communicating with them and they haven't communicated that, what the hell are they communicating? So that's what confuses me. Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I mean, they're not communicating. they're communicating, hey, I need you to take care of this today, or hey, you screwed that up, or hey, nice job on whatever, right? Again, we've talked about before of, not being specific with praise. Those are the kind of stuff that they're communicating. They're communicating that, this new policy rolled out, which, again, not that those things aren't important, right? Like, I do think, you do need to communicate on policies and things like that, right? That stuff does provide value. But they're not communicating these other things, right? They're just, a lot of times I see they think that people don't care, people won't connect with it. And it's like, it's kind of your responsibility to help them connect with it, right? Like, you can do it in a way that people understand it and connect with it and again, get it. I used to, a small company that I ran, every quarter we had an all hands, and every all hands, I went through all financials. So they knew where we were at financially, what our targets were, what our goals were. But I also took time to say, okay, in every department, how does each department, like, what is their role? How does it affect every other department? If we don't do this, how does that cause downstream effects here and here and here and here? And then I'd have them give me examples. Like, so what do you think? Fulfillment, if something goes wrong in fulfillment and a package gets sent out to the wrong person or doesn't go out, what consequences is that? Like, why does that matter? And I would get, now granted, the small company, so a little bit easier to have that nice communication, but you can do this at a team level, right? You could talk about and get out of these silos that, like, oh, only my department matters. No, your department impacts the greater good. We would talk about what is our 10-year plan, 5-year plan, like, where are we going? What are our values? We would incorporate our values into everything that we do, to interview questions, to performance reviews, all of that kind of stuff. So we were constantly communicating this. Like, everything we did, we were talking about this stuff. And so people really bought into that, right? And people would understand, why their role is important. It created greater collaboration between departments because they understood each other more and how their role impacts other people. But you have to take the time to do it. People just aren't necessarily going to come up with that on their own. Some people will, like, some people will get it out the gate. But I found that the vast majority of people won't. As a leader in an organization, either you need to do it with your team or department, or, depending on the scale, depending on the organization, like, all of this stuff needs to be tailored to the organization, right? Because every organization has slightly different needs, but the foundation is still the same. This is the argument that I make often, is that, I see what people will do a lot of times is they will say, okay, we're broken. We need to bring in this high priced, excellent leader to come in and they're going to fix everything. You haven't established the foundation. You haven't established what your mission is, what your vision is, what your values are.
Okay, so this is, all right, you brought up an interesting point, and this is something that confuses me. When they bring in a leader with leadership training or whatever, and they always bring up these things, well, I like Lean Six Sigma, and I know, like, Agile, and I know this process. Well, you're a project management expert too. I mean, I've seen your resume. It's like this long, like, you know how to do 30 things, right? And project management is one of them. So you excel at a lot of foundational, things that process in engineers use at jobs. But isn't knowledge of, like, the core of the core job? It's like what people are programming, how they program it, where the holes are, what's wrong with the code, what needs to be fixed, and how you do it. Aren't those things maybe the most important thing, is like what you're actually doing, like the knitting, as they call it, and how you do it, as opposed to theory? I'll give you a good example of what I'm talking about. Is there any way in the Marines, if you were called, your team was called to a special deployment where you were going to be sent to a certain country and take on a terrorist cell, would you bring in a leader who had only been in the Marine Corps for a month to join your team, and like,
I hope not.
to join your team and like go overseas, at ODART 30, in country downrange? The answer is no, right? So that person would have an in-depth, intricate knowledge of all of the things that were done on that kind of mission because they had been on that kind of mission before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're in a software environment, like Elon Musk walking into Twitter asking people, so what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people say, I can't really explain that simply. I guess everybody knows what happened after that, but still people bring in leaders to communicate to people what they should be doing in a highly theoretical way, and having absolutely no knowledge of what they do during the day and why they do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, so it's funny. So you talk about, like, software, right? So if you don't understand the goal of what you're trying to accomplish, if you don't understand, again, why it's important, what you're supposed to be doing, we would talk a lot when I was helping manage development of a website of, like, is this a bug or a feature, right? Well, how do you know that if you don't understand what you're trying to do?
Exactly.
Right? Like, is it a bug? Like, we would talk about stuff and say, oh, there's this bug. And they're like, no, that was designed that way because of X, Y, Z. And it's like, oh, well, that shouldn't have been, right? Because we didn't, and we got better at it, right? But sometimes you just don't think those things through. But you have to really understand the process, what your outcome is. That's why, like, when we talk about having that 5-year plan, 10-year, like what you're doing. But yeah, you need to understand like what is your role? Why does it matter? Like what are you expected to do? Or else how do you problem solve? How do you identify when things are going wrong, when you're not moving in the direction that the company is trying to move in? It's like you have a big organization. I think X is a good example of that. Elon coming in, you have this huge, massive, multi-billion-dollar company that's trying to move in a direction, trying to steer this ship. How can you do that when everybody's sort of like moving in a different direction or spinning around in circles because they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing? You can't. So then you just don't make the forward progress that you need because nobody understands what is expected of them, what their job is, what they're supposed to be doing. Again, the direction of the company and how their job plays a role in that. So it's critically important, especially if you're trying to find out why maybe you're not hitting certain metrics or why you're not as successful as you need to be, or, the number of things, the KPIs that businesses track.
Okay. So I'm going to tee you up for the end of this episode where we're going to ask you to do these 3 things to improve your communication. But before I do that, I think I'm going to be stating the obvious because I think I know what the answer is because I've heard you talk about this a lot. So let me reiterate. I don't think that there would be many people in the country right now who would know as much about engagement from a scientific standpoint and the nuts and bolts of it than you. Because you spent a lot of time in the Marine Corps, you spent corporate America, and now you're a scientist and you've got your doctorate in organizational industrial psychology, and your field of study looking at evidence and facts is engagement. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to call you an engagement expert. I think we have established that. Having those credentials, and I think I've heard you say this before, isn't your most important job as a leader is to go in there in a helpful way, mm-hmm. sit down with people in a friendly, helpful way, try and help them understand why they were hired, what their job is, and what they are expected to do in terms of hitting key performance or helping move the needle on key performance indicators, mm-hmm. so that they're helping the company improve results and the bottom line. That's your number one job, right? To explain mm-hmm. that to them and to find out what it is they don't know, and then give them whatever training and resources they know to know more and become better acquainted with what they're expected to do, and give them the training to do it better. And communicate all of that every single day. Isn't that your number one job?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, in the research that I've done, one of the key leadership behaviors that came out to correlate or to be a predictor of engagement is information sharing. And again, that can be things like policies or whatever, but that's not all that it means. And so I was looking specifically at remote work, but interesting in the literature, that is a behavior that shows up even in traditional environments, which most of the research is on, right? There's not that much on remote work. So how you do it kind of depends on the organization, right? Like if you're a remote organization, you're going to maybe communicate that through Teams meetings, Zoom meetings, Slack,
it's the
WhatsApp,
same thing though, right?
But
it's the same thing.
It's the foundation, the fundamentals are the same. It's just the mechanism which you do it, right? Like what is the tool that you're using? You're not able to bring them in a conference room, but you're able to sit on a Teams meeting. Yeah. So I think, what you were mentioning, what we've kind of talked about, I think one of the things leaders should do is get a baseline, figure out where people like ask in a one-on-one or in a group meetings, like, okay, so what do you think your role is here? Like from your perspective, like, what do you do here? Right. Or like why, or, what value does this department bring to the organization, or how do we contribute to the organization's goals? Just, and let them know, like, it's okay if you don't have an answer. I just want to understand from your perspective, like what do you think? Because then you can get a baseline, because one mistake I think people do often is they make assumptions, and they think that people either know or don't know something. And so you end up getting people to check out because you're explaining something that they already know, or you're not explaining things in depth because you just assume everybody knows this thing. So, get a baseline. It can be really good if to do that in one-on-one so that people don't feel put on the spot. But I think that goes just a long way of figuring out, okay, where are the gaps that I need to address? Because again, as you might be in an organization where the CEO or senior leaders or whatever don't care about this stuff, you can care about it for your team and at least try to shelter them from some of the other toxic stuff.
You've just raised something that was great. I love that. And I think this is going to be longer than I thought, because you've raised a very interesting point for me. So I'm going to go off a little bit of a tangent on communication, because I think it ties in. This is going to sound kind of random, but tell me if this makes sense. Okay. I think we've talked about innate curiosity and like the importance of being able to assess for or identifying the people that you hire that have this innate curiosity. I don't think people are looking for that in the way they should, because in today's technology-driven world, as complicated as things are, leaders and even team members and leaders especially have to have a natural, innate curiosity about what other people do around them and why they're doing what they're doing, and talking to people and having friendly conversations that are curiosity driven. Like, tell me what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated to know what you do. I've heard you're doing this, but I don't really know what that means. Can you explain it to me? Because I would like to know. And so they go around and they talk to people and they have a curiosity and they find out things and they discover, and they talk to their whole team. And then at the end they go, wow, now I really understand what people do because I'm curious and I'm interested in someone other than myself. This is important. I'm interested in people other than myself.
Yeah.
And I'm naturally curious. Dr. Peters, I don't see that I don't see that a lot. I mean, I see people who are mostly interested in themselves and inwardly looking. I'm not saying everybody. I just say there's too many people.
Sure.
Who are constantly talking about themselves. You never hear them talking about anyone else. They're always talking about themselves. And I go, I'm not sure they have the level of innate curiosity that I'm looking for, because I know that as a nationwide hiring consultant, how to improve your hiring processes, right? I always say, look for people who are naturally curious.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find people that you would feel comfortable with having conversations with the people around them, knowing that they are going to take the time to do what you just said and find out what people do, have a curiosity about it, and then have conversations with them to help them do their jobs better? Because that requires something in your DNA. You're interested in something other than yourself. When you've been in the recruiting role, helping to hire leaders or managers, how do you look for that trait that I just talked about, of the innate natural curiosity in other people and other things?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I think when you're looking at recruiting, I'm a big fan of behavioral interviews, because I think that gets past, some of the BS answers that you get in interviews, right? When you actually do them right and you ask, for them to talk about a scenario, and then you ask probing questions and you dig in there. And so you can use that to try to understand, ask questions around their, communication style and how they've interacted with people before. But I think some of the things that you also look at in an interview, and I know this is often coached about, ask questions about the company. And so I think you can kind of tell I've been able to tell the difference between somebody who is genuinely curious about the organization, the job, whatever, versus people who just wrote down a couple questions because they know they need to ask them, right? Because we end up having like a back and forth conversation for the people who are really curious, right? They'll say, oh, I was looking on your website and I saw this and this, why did you guys do this? Or what is this? What happens in this role? And and they'll just ask a lot of interesting questions.
This is core and this is fascinating. So I just want to nail this to the wall, because we have talked about this before, but now it's kind of percolating up as something I think is a key takeaway for people. As a doctor in organizational industrial psychology, a person who spent a lot of time recruiting, have built a lot of teams. How important on a scale of 1 to 100 is that trait of natural, innate, ferocious curiosity? How important is that curiosity trait to you among other traits when you're looking at people that you really want to hire?
Oh, I mean, I think that's probably the top. I mean, if not, one of the top. So 100. And you and I may disagree on this. Where I do think is that you can coach some of that. The question is, do you have the time to do that or the know-how to coach that, right? To really get at that. I do think it's better if you get people who are just naturally curious and naturally want to know more, especially in the leadership roles, right? It's like, I think it can be important in every role, but particularly leadership roles. So you got to end up asking yourself, if we know that that's important, which I agree is incredibly important, if you're going to take somebody who maybe isn't there yet, are you going to coach that into them, right? And how are you going to do that, which can be a challenge, and can take a lot of work, and maybe harder than you have the resources to actually get them to that point. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I think that we need, I think everybody should go in and be curious. And there's the flip side of that, is that, are they not curious because it's just naturally not in them? Or are they not curious because they've just been so disconnected from the work that they just don't care anymore? And, you got to kind of figure that out. But if you're looking from a hiring standpoint, yeah, I think you need to try to assess that and up front.
Okay. So before we get to your 3 tips of how to be a better communicator for this week, I do want to talk about this just one more time, because I think we've had conversations where we've agreed on this, that everyone who is successful can answer this question to a certain extent. What do the people around you do? The ones that you are supposed to be supporting the most, and the ones who are supposed to be supporting you, what do they do? Mm-hmm. And if you can't answer that question, something's wrong. Well, if they're in a non-leadership position, I'm going to fault the leadership.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it's the leadership's fault for not explaining that to you. It's their bad.
Yeah.
But if you're a leader and you come to me and I say, so tell me the 3 other executives or leaders that you had to work with most closely during the course of the day to get your job done. Okay, cool. What did those people do? Mm. And how did they do it? If someone tells me, I don't know, in my mind, Brian, the interview's over. There's no way I'm going to move forward in my mind with the person who can't tell me what the people around them did in a leadership position did.
Yeah.
I'm just not interested. I don't know about you, but I go, okay.
Well, because they probably came from an organization that's siloed, right? Sorry to cut you off, but if they don't know, they probably only cared about their department or their team or whatever, and that causes a lot of issues because you're not thinking about how your actions are impacting other departments. Like I talked about with doing it the all hands, right? You're getting this very siloed thing, and so if everybody's kind of working for their own, just their department's success without talking about or thinking about how it impacts. I see this often, and I know you're running salespeople. I see this often in sales, where salespeople will sell a job or whatever, especially in professional services, right? Where we're going to consult or do this without thinking about, okay, do these terms, are they going to put people in a bind down the road where it's going to be harder for them to execute this contract that I'm selling? Like they're just thinking about, this is a $2 million, $3 million, $4 million or 100,000, whatever the number is, doesn't really matter. Not necessarily thinking about the downstream impacts and trying to negotiate a deal that is ultimately going to be helpful for the people that need to execute that deal to be able to do that, right? It's not just in sales, but that's just something that I've seen come up often, especially in professional services, where I've seen just things get sold that I'm like, why did we agree to do that? Because it makes it much harder to operate and to actually make money off of that. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think especially in leadership roles, when you can't communicate that, you're in a siloed department, organization, team, whatever, and you didn't do anything to break out of that.
Before I get to your tips, I'm just going to say, well, I just think something's wrong with not knowing. I mean, there's a great concept that they use in the military that's really, really, really big right now. Is the whole concept of a team of teams.
Yeah.
A a team of teams is like what everyone seems to be uh, striving for in the cutting edge of military training, right? So if you go on a special mission and you have people from different um, areas cooperating with one another on a big mission, it could be special forces, also the Marines, also another branch, whatever. In a team of teams, when they're preparing the mission, everyone who's on another team knows exactly what everyone in every other team does at the granular
Yeah.
level. There's nothing that they don't know. So when they're sent into a really dangerous environment on a critical mission, everyone knows everything that everyone is doing. So if something goes wrong, they know how to fix it instantly. So no one dies. Why wouldn't you do the same? How could you possibly be in a business environment and not do the same thing? Why wouldn't you realize that certain things from a business standpoint are really life and death of the business, and you want everyone on any team to know what everyone else on the team does, because it's the most important thing to success. How could you possibly say it's okay to live in an environment like that?
Well, I think it's because people are, again, only focused. If you think about, again, at the team or the department level, they're only focused on their success, right? Because they have to justify their value, right? Or what they have to justify their existence. I mean, you see the same thing in governments. I mean, when terrorist attacks have happened, when you look at like 9/11, there was a lot of conversation around a bunch of different departments knew pieces of what was happening, but nobody was sharing that information. It was all siloed because they all have to justify their existence. So none of them want to talk to each other, which results in these catastrophic events. It's the same thing that happens in organizations. Everybody's justifying their existence and not really considering how that impacts the organization as a whole. And if you don't have, again, senior leaders, CEOs, COOs, whoever, really pushing out that we need everybody to work together, a lot of people just don't take it upon themselves to do it.
Now we've got to the point where you need to give us 3 tips, because next week we're going to come back and talk about how to help people collaborate better and to build a culture of creativity and autonomy, which is one of the 3 pillars, the things we've been talking about in the future of engagement: leadership, behaviors, communication, which we've just talked about, and then creating a culture of autonomy, creativity, and collaboration. Take us home and give us 3 tips on how to become a better communicator to get better results this week.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about one of them, I think, which is the curiosity part. So what I would always tell leaders is like have seek to understand conversations, right? So don't go in with assuming you know everything. Have a conversation of really being curious, really trying to understand. And it could be, why was this thing successful? Why was it not successful? What, I see this person's performance dipped off, I want to understand where that's coming from. I actually had a conversation in one job I was at. I got a call from a manager that wanted to fire an employee. And during that conversation, so I'm just asking questions. I'm just trying to understand like what's going on. And they told me that they used to be a great performer, and then their son was killed, and all of a sudden they weren't a good performer. I'm like, okay, well, that's something we need to understand more. So I called the person, and yeah, it turned out she never took time off of work, and she was struggling dealing with the death of her child. So, because I was asking questions rather than just being like, yeah, let's term her, she's poor performance, we can do that. I got her information for her EAP, which provided therapy services that would work with her insurance. And we put her on leave of absence. She was gone for 4 or 6 weeks, something like that. Came back, performance went right back to where it was. She just needed some help, right? She needed somebody to ask the question. So I think leaders need to do more of that, right? It's just ask the questions. Don't make assumptions. It's really easy. Just assume somebody doesn't care anymore rather than actually digging in to find out what the key issue is. I also think getting to know your team well enough to communicate that works well for them right? Some people, again, some people are really good with WhatsApp message or a Slack message. Some people need more, talking face to face or
Mhm.
virtually or
Of
whatever.
course, yeah.
Some people you can be very direct with, they prefer that, versus some people you need to be a little bit softer with. And
Mhm.
so I've had to, learn that myself the hard way of like not communicating one style for every single person,
Absolutely, yeah.
and really tailoring it to the person. And it takes time to get to know that. But I think you should do the work to do it because it'll be more effective. The people will be more responsive. You'll get more out of them that way. And then I also think like don't over communicate. That's another thing I see organizations as a whole do, where they'll send, email after email after email after email or message after message. And it's just eventually it's like, you get spam calls. Eventually you just stop picking up phone calls because you get so much spam, right? It's the same thing. So like really think about making sure you're communicating the important things, the right things in a good sequence that makes sense. So people aren't just ignoring what you're doing. So if you have to send out emails, that's fine, but don't send back to back to back emails, right? Like maybe lump everything that you need to and send it out. Or if you are sending Slack messages or whatever, right? Like just really think about the amount of communication, have a communication strategy. Like that's, organization I work for now, they're looking at a mass communication strategy for all, or mass communication to all employees. And I said, we need to have a strategy for this, because if you don't, and everybody just sort of communicates whatever they want, they're going to get ignored. And so important stuff is going to get missed.
Can I interject one
Yeah.
point in point two before you go on to point three? I'll ask your opinion on this. I don't put a filter on encouragement. I'm guilty. I overdose on encouraging people, or I don't know if overdose is the right word, but I um, I give as much encouragement constantly as I can during the day, because I
Yeah.
know the world is hard.
Yeah.
A lot of people are beaten up in the world that we live in, whatever. So I don't hold back. I send a lot of messages during the day. Great job, way to go! You're a rock star, fantastic, and people seem to eat it up. I mean, they seem to be
Yeah.
looking for that. I mean, is there a limit that you should put on the number of times you tell someone great job during the day?
I think if it's authentic, and again, if it goes back to what we've had previous conversations of like how you're doing it, I think can be fine. You do run the risk, I think, and what I've seen and experienced is of almost like love bombing somebody, where it's like you're saying it all the time. And then when you take that, if you take that away, right, you get busy, you can't, it can make people feel like, oh, I'm not doing as good a job, because last week or a month ago or for the last 3 months, every day I'm getting, hey, you're doing great. And then you get busy or whatever. And now all of a sudden that communication has died. Am I doing bad now? Like, am I not doing? So it puts a lot of pressure on the leader to keep that up. Right. And I don't want to say it's a bad thing, because I don't think encouragement is bad, especially if it's authentic and done the right way. But I think you do run the risk of if you have to start pulling it back because of bandwidth issues or whatever, that people might start feeling like, oh, maybe I'm not doing good, or that other stuff was BS because they were doing it so often.
Yeah, I get your caution is good. I hadn't really thought about that, because I think you're right. And I think it also might depend on the job,
Yeah.
because I'm talking about, being in constant communication and trying to uplift salespeople.
Yeah.
And, sales is brutal.
Mm-hmm.
It's like going to war. It's really brutal. Like the sales world, extremely brutal. So I think I've just found in the sales profession that people can take a lot of encouragement, and you need to do that as an antidote to the number of times that someone is super rude to them, yells at them, they run across things that are they get rejected, and that kind of thing. So I don't hold back when it comes to constantly encouraging the sales forces that I work with. But I can see your point about other jobs. Maybe a point where it's just too much.
Yeah. And I think it also goes back to knowing your people, right? And one question that I used to ask when onboarding people is like, how do you prefer to be like acknowledged or celebrated, right? Do you prefer me talking about it in all hands, right? Do you prefer one-on-one communication, a Slack message or whatever? Like, what is your because some people, like I've known people who don't want people to announce their birthday. Like it makes them super uncomfortable. They don't. So I would try to tailor it that way. And it's easy to do if you have, and we haven't talked about this, but span of scope, right? Like how many, or span of control rather. So how many people report to you? If you have 500 people report to you, I would argue that you shouldn't have 500 people report to you. But it's probably not doable. But when you have a really good span of control, you can do that, right? When you have a manageable number of people, you can kind of get to know what they like, what they don't like, and you can tailor it that way. So again, I don't think it's necessarily it's always a bad thing. I just think there are some things that it can cause problems for people. But if you're authentic and people know that, I think it's fine. And I don't think people will take it the wrong way, as long as it's just not, again, good job for what, so,
Yeah.
you know,
So, let's recapitulate what your first 2 points to be a better communicator. Number one is show that you're a curious person.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. What was number two again?
What did we say was number two? So we talked about, we want to do to seek to understand.
Right.
We talked about the way that you communicate, right? Like getting to know the communication style of people. So making
Right.
sure that you are communicating in a way that works for them, whether that's very direct or not, or again, to the point of constant encouragement versus maybe pulling that back a little bit, like understanding that.
Great. Seeking to understand.
Yeah.
Rock solid.
Yeah.
Rock solid. Understanding their style, so you can tailor your conversation appropriately. Huge. I think we'll talk about that topic more in the future, because there was this great book called How to Mind Read Your Customers. Who wrote that? Oh, I remember. I think I'll have something to say about that later. But number three, take us home with like the third big tip.
Well, I mean, we kind of talked about it already, which is the amount of communication, or having a communication strategy. I think, and so I think it encompasses everything, right? I think whether it's an organization thinking about how they communicate, but even as your team, like, how are you going to communicate with your team that provides them with what they need, but not kind of overdoing it, right? And so really kind of thinking about that. And again, it takes getting to know your team, and it takes those other two things that we've talked about into account, but taking some time to really think about that. Less is more sometimes. And, when you like, research shows that when you're communicating, frequency matters, length matters, like all of that stuff matters. And there's not, I don't think, one size fits all, but you really need to think about, for your particular use case, are you communicating effectively? Is your strategy effective? If you're constantly communicating stuff, and I see this all the time where it's like, oh, I missed that, or I missed this, you're not doing it effectively, right? You need to rethink about, okay, why are they missing that? Maybe instead of doing paragraphs, I need to do bullets so they understand the important things in this email that I send out daily or weekly or whatever. Maybe I need to send reminders through Slack, or maybe I need to bring everybody together once a week for, like, I'm a big fan of like team meetings, right? To bring everybody together and talk about issues, talk about what's going on in the organization, things like that, doing weekly team meetings. I think it's going to be dependent on your team dynamics, right? But there are lots of different strategies you can use. You just need to develop it, and then iterate over time when you realize what works.
I think that's a great closing. You just said, be specific, be concise.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the greatest communication tools and ideas that has ever been gifted upon mankind. I would just say, one, seek to understand. One, okay, but talk to them and their style, understand the personality types and how you're communicating, show some emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And three, be specific and be concise.
Mm-hmm.
If we just let's just practice that this week. Let's just practice seeking to understand, understanding the style of the person we're talking to, and being concise and specific. Can we just agree that we're all going to go away and try those three pillars this week, and then come back and see if things were better?
Yeah. Well, I do want to say too, like, in all of these things that we talk about, tips or whatever, nobody should expect to be perfect at any of this, right? Like, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be upset one day and not communicate the best, or what, right? So it's like, also give yourself, I guess a fourth tip is give yourself some grace in all of this stuff, is that as you're working on things that might be new that you haven't tried before, you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to work out exactly how you want. So that's okay. You need to have space for that and learn from it, instead of, some people beat themselves up about it. Right. And we're trying to get better, not be perfect.
Right. Well, One of my favorite expressions in the medical community is it's always important to defer expertise. So I'm going to defer to your expertise on this since you are the expert in engagement. Dr. Ryan Peters, thank you so much. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your leadership, and look forward to talking to you next week when we try and explain how you can become a better collaborator.
All right. Sounds good.
See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of the Future of Engagement podcast. We'd love to keep the conversation going down in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like. And if you want to stay in the loop of future episodes, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one.